and beyond. All right, we're on live and on air. And everyone brace yourself. I'm going to hand out the handout. We're starting with the handout today, but I'm going to have to ask you. No, not just don't turn it over. Keep your eyes on the first paragraph only. Okay? I know it's hard, but
I always read ahead. I can't help it.
I couldn't come up with another way to do what I wanted to do without having to print a bunch of extra pieces of paper and just burn through the forest. So,
okay, so you will be good environmentalist.
well, you know, I kind of would like to make it work.
The colors draw your eye.
The colors do draw your eyes. I know. We will get to the bright colors in a minute, but we got to do something else first. All right, we're going to read from Alice in Wonderland. Right. It's not a crossword. Don't worry. It's not Sudoku. Don't start filling in the numbers. Okay, so we're starting with just the top paragraph. I knew this would cause chaos. All right, so top paragraph, Alice in Wonderland. Anyone would like to read from Lewis Carroll's favorite? Yes?
Let the jury consider their verdict, the king said, for about the 20th time that day. No, no, said the queen. Sentence first, verdict afterwards. Stuff and nonsense, said Alice loudly. The idea of having the sentence first? Hold your tongue, said the queen, turning purple. I won't, said Alice. Off with her head, the queen shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. Who cares for you, said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time. You are nothing but a pack of cards.
All right, great quote. I think all of us are familiar with the scene with the Queen of Hearts and all of that. But what does this mean? What's happening in the story here?
Arguing what comes first.
What comes first? Between what and what?
A verdict or a sentence?
Right, so we got a court case,
Is
right?
he guilty? Do we sentence him first and then discover whether he's guilty?
Right.
A court case.
This is a court case. And the king says that, we should have the jury should consider their verdict. And the queen says, no. The verdict comes after. The sentence comes first. Which, of course, to us would say
Ridiculous.
that you have to decide the verdict and then you can decide the sentence. Which is why Alice responds, stuff and nonsense. Stuff and nonsense? Is this a common colloquialism where you guys come from?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes? You say stuff and nonsense all the time?
You do.
Did you get it from Alice in
But you read the
Wonderland?
book, right?
Indirectly.
Indirectly, right. It's not exactly a common idiom. What does the word stuff mean?
Things.
Things. And nonsense?
Things. Silly things.
Silly things? So does that mean that she's saying, well, part of what you're saying is real and part of what you're saying is silly?
No.
No?
No.
But the word says stuff. Stuff is something. I mean, that's like saying something and nothing, right?
Full of silliness.
Full-
Full of nonsense. Full of.
So stuff can mean full?
The stuff and the no stuff.
Stuff, well, exactly. It means stuff and no stuff. So I'm confused. I'm confused by English. If you were to
Will
give,
not be the first
it would not be the first time. It will not be the last. If you were to take this and run,
Hold your tongue.
what about what? Hold your tongue.
Oh, that's
That-
that's another.
Do a visual on that.
But that is at least an idiom that is still in common use.
Yeah.
Stuff and nonsense.
But stuff and nonsense, I'm willing to wager, apart from Judy, that most of us don't use that phrase. And those who do might only use it because of this, although Lewis Carroll did not invent the phrase, and it did exist after his writings and before his writings.
I've heard that phrase quite often.
Stuff and nonsense?
Yeah.
What were you doing that you heard the phrase stuff and
Yeah.
nonsense? You must have been behaving rather oddly then.
No, in a discussion, rather than saying that's stupid, you might say that's stuff and nonsense.
That's stuff and nonsense. Or you even hear sometimes people make a, what's it called, a malapropism, where that's stuff of nonsense.
Yes.
Right.
Right, where they have
Mhm.
taken it, and because stuff and nonsense doesn't sound literally to be anything of sense, and modify it to say, well, that's the stuff of nonsense. And they try to make it sound more like an actual English phrase or a contemporary English phrase. And no logic, exactly. if we're having trouble, and trust me, if you were to plug this into Google Translate and asking it to translate it to another language, stuff and nonsense would not come out well, nor hold your tongue. If we're having trouble understanding this, what happens when we try to understand Torah? What happens when we try to understand words and idioms and context that is 3,000 years different and a very different social context, very different environmental context? I'm not just talking about greenhouse gas, I'm talking about the environment in which they lived, the things that they saw, the things that they smelled, what they felt. How do we understand the words of Torah? How can we understand the words of Torah if we can barely understand Lewis Carroll? And we're going to be seeing that in the very important parasha of Yitro, right? Yitro, which is most famous, of course, for including 10 fabulous utterances, the Aseret HaDibrot, or otherwise known in English as the Ten Commandments. Okay, but before we get to the Ten Commandments, there's a very interesting prologue in this parasha. That is to say, before we get to the actual Ten Commandments in chapter 20, in chapter 18, we have the very odd digression from the narrative. We've left Egypt, we've been traveling, we're now moving towards Sinai, we can tell that something big is coming, and all of a sudden, Moses has to chat with his father-in-law. I mean, really? This is what's interrupting us on our march towards the theophany, the presence of God? Is a discussion?
Visit.
What's that, a visit? Okay, my father-in-law shows up, so, okay, God, can you hold a minute? You know what he's like. I've got to take, just give me half an hour, okay? Actually, make it an hour. He talks a lot. And so we're going to look at this very interesting, seemingly non sequitur digression. And hopefully we'll find out that it's essential before what comes next. All right, so we're on chapter 18, and we're going to be starting with verse 13. That's on page 434 if you are playing in the red book in the Eitz Chaim. It's whatever page is in your own version. If you are just reading chapter 18, the book of Exodus, verse 13 to start.
Next day, Moses sat as a magistrate among the people, while the people stood about Moses from morning until evening.
All right, so magistrate is a very fancy word for judge, which is a very fancy word for decision maker, right? He is the decider, as one of our presidents coined it. So he is sitting as a shofet, and he's doing this from morning till evening. This is a full-time job.
But when Moses' father-in-law saw how much he had to do for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing to the people? Why do you act alone while all the people stand around you from morning until evening?" Moses replied to his father-in-law, "It is because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes before me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known the laws and teachings of God."
Okay, so Moses' father-in-law clearly doesn't get it. Right, Moses is the leader of the people, and the people need to know what God wants. And when people have issues that they want answers to, they have to go to the man of God to get the answer. So what do you mean, what am I doing? I'm doing God's work. Was that really what Yitro was unclear about? No? What do you think it was, Paul? What was he actually asking him?
Two things, I think.
Yep.
One, this is going to burn you out very quickly, and you won't be able to effectively do what you say your job is, number one. And number two, it's a lot of people standing around in line waiting, and what's that doing to their day?
All right, so Mitzu Yan, it's not good for you. It's not good for them, right? It's not good for you because you are going to be burnt out if you're just 24 hours a day sitting here. And it's not good for them because the line is around the corner. And that's going to cause a lot of trouble within the community while they're waiting to get the answers that you say you can give, which you're not going to give so well because they're going to get burnt out. That's what Yitro is actually describing as the problem. Now, of course, if Moses had recognized that as a problem, he wouldn't have been doing what he was doing already, which is why it was helpful that his father-in-law was talking to him. And we can thank God for good father-in-laws. I know I can personally. So instead, Yitro goes on.
Go back to
Verse 17, yes.
Okay, but Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing you are doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out, and these people as well, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You represent the people before God. You bring the disputes before God, and enjoin upon them the laws and teachings, and make known to them the way they are to go and the practices they are to follow. You shall also seek out from among all the men, the people, capable men who fear God, trustworthy men who spurn ill-gotten gain.
That is to say,
they won't be bribed.
they don't take bribes, exactly.
Set these over them as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Have them bring every major dispute to you, but let them decide every minor dispute themselves. Make it easier for yourself by letting them share the burden with you. If you do this, and God so commands you, you will be able to bear up, and all these people too will go home unwearied.
Okay, so what are we describing here, if we were going to use a more modern terminology for this?
Our court system.
Bureaucracy.
Of course, a bureaucracy.
A judicial system.
A judicial system, right? Where you have, if you've got 10 people, right? This is 10, right? They're going to have one judge for the 10. And then after you do that, times 10, so you've got 100 people, right? Each of them having their own judges. That's meant to be another judge, da, 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 da. Then they'll have another judge that goes over them. And then they'll have another judge over them, which pulls in from all these guys, and so on until we get to Moses. And how do things move up the ladder?
If the dispute is too difficult.
Okay, so unlike our judicial system, which is based upon appealing to the ruling, that is to say that someone who was a litigant disagrees with the ruling the judge gave, this judicial system moves up when the judge says, "I don't know what the right decision is." It's not when the litigants disagree, but when the judge is unclear. And the judge himself feels unclear. Right? So it's not challenging the judge's ruling, it's the judge saying this is too challenging for me. And the judge says, okay, well, I can't figure this out, so I'm going to ask the judge above me. And if he can't figure it out, he'll ask the judge above him, and so on and so on and so on, until only the most difficult and challenging or unclear cases come before Moses. And in that way, everyone gets good judgment. Make sense? And the problems between the people down here in the ranks of 10, they can get solved by the guy who handles only the problems for their 10. And that means he's probably not that busy. And Moses is only handling the ones that have reached the level of true confusion. And therefore, he's not that busy either and can spend time only on those issues which are most problematic.
Do we have any information about whether there were rotations?
That's dramatic.
Sorry.
Yes. And we should all have theme music.
If there's one judge over these 10,
Mm-hmm.
and that judge is constantly over those 10, there could easily be corruption. If there's rotation, I think it would be a bit of a preventative.
Possibly, although what's being described here is that the judges have to be of good character.
Sure.
Meaning a blind rotation may not be the best solution. Now, were they always the same guys all the time?
That's what
Not necessarily,
I'm sorry, that's what
Right.
I meant.
but there may have been still a limited pool of people that you could draw from, because not everyone is both capable of judging or capable of resisting the temptations of being the judge. Because we knew that Moses
Supreme Court is for life, though.
Well, our Supreme Court is for life, and indeed, the standing of being fit to be a dayan within rabbinic tradition is a position that is for life.
Right.
Whether or not you're used as a dayan is a little bit more flexible, and certainly within the modern rabbinic system, who is the member of a beit din, of a court, is often in rotation and in flux. Okay, so Moses hears good advice. And like the good person that he is, and humble and willing to take good advice wherever he hears it from, he continues on in verse 24.
Moses heeded his father-in-law and did just as he had said. Moses chose capable men out of all Israel and appointed them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. and they judged the people at all times. The difficult matters they would bring to Moses, and all the minor matters they would decide themselves. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way to his own land.
All right. So first of all, just a little bit of a linguistic thing. These capable men, if you look in the Hebrew, that's verse 25. These are the Anshe Chayil, which is, of course, the masculine plural version of Eshet Chayil, which was what we recite Friday night from the end of the book of Proverbs, which is often described as a woman of valor, right? And here the word Chayil is not being used for valor, it's being used for capability, right? Which is why sometimes the translation of woman of valor, although it sounds poetic and pretty, is perhaps not really getting to the heart of what that proverb is talking about. It's talking about someone who is capable, who is of accomplished character. And notice as well that what is being described here when they are over their thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens is not describing being in charge of. We're not talking about a system of executive leadership. We're talking about a system of judicial answering. So if you have a problem, you go to these guys. They don't get to tell you what to do unless you come to them with a situation. Does that distinction make sense? Because oftentimes people think that this is sort of like the legionnaire organization chart of the Roman military, you know, or even an American military we have now. We have different ranks, and you know, you can give orders down the rank. That's not what's being described here. It's not a question of giving orders, although they did learn from the people that were above them. It's a question of you come to them when you have a question. If you don't have a question, you're just going on fine, which means at the smallest unit of decision-making process is actually what?
The person, individual.
The individual. Because the individual has to decide, assuming it's a question that they have for themselves, whether they need to go to the judge of their tent. That's their decision. If they don't decide to go to the judge of the 10, then the judge of the 10 doesn't render a decision on their behalf. Now, if he and he have problems, then one or other one may drag them before the judge, and then we're into a regular sort of judicial decision process. But it's important to remember that there's an element of individuality at the base of all of this, that there has to be some individual responsibility for deciding whether you need a judgment beyond your own. If something's too difficult for you, you go to your 10. If it's too difficult for him, you go to the 50, 100, and so on. Make sense? Maybe?
It is the original hierarchy of the human being. You know, I mean, like a business, Jewish, or whatever.
It's not the original hierarchy, because the original hierarchies were usually based on coercion, on force. That is to say, most hierarchies are from the top down, in the sense of, I want to force the people who are weaker than me to do what I want them to do. And this is saying, I, Mr. Joe Schmo, random individual Jew, want to do what God wants me to do. And so I am going to use the people along this chain to make sure I can answer that question. It's not that they're forcing me, it's they are leading me. They are guiding me towards that ultimate goal. So it's hierarchies can come from the grassroots up, and sometimes they can come from down. And this one is technically coming from the bottom up. That's they get their authority from top down, but the motion is from the bottom up. That's what we're supposed to be doing, is seeking answers, and we have to have a system for finding those answers. Right? That's why this is not an executive hierarchy, this is a judicial hierarchy. Make sense? Maybe?
What if the problem is an adversarial one?
Well, then you go to your guy in the 10 and you say, me and my neighbor disagree on the property line of, you know, he put his tent too close to my tent, or he took one of my sheep, and the guy says, no, I didn't. And you go to the judge and you present the evidence, and the arguments are heard, and then the judge renders a decision.
And if the adversary doesn't like the decision, he has no recourse?
Okay. So what do you guys think? You go to the Beit Din, you go to your rabbinic or your Jewish judicial process, and the person in charge says it's the sheep belongs to him,
Right.
and the guy on the other side says, no, that's the wrong answer. It's really my sheep. Appeals?
Yeah.
No.
No.
No?
No. If it can be proven that the judge made an absolute error, whether there was or there was new information, then yes, the decision can be appealed. But just because you don't like it,
No.
or just because you want to say the same thing again and hope a different judge will give you a different answer, no. The decision is the decision, and that's going to be a very important point later on in our discussion this morning or afternoon now, because what the judge says goes. And does that mean it's a good system, or does that make it a bad system? How much then are we depending upon these judges? Right? Because, well, what if the guy's wrong? Or what if he did take a bribe, but it can't be proved? Then justice has been twisted. But it's okay, right? I mean, really, this seems like a very unnecessarily complex system, doesn't it? Because think about it, in just 2 chapters, with a small interlude, we're going to get the we're going to get the 10 Commandments. And that, I mean, this is simplest of laws. I mean, how much judicial system do you need to handle don't murder? Right? How much judicial system do you need for don't steal? Right? Right? Well, stuff and nonsense. It's a little bit harder than just that. So we're actually going to look at the 10 Commandments outside of the text. You all should be reading it on your own anyway, because just the breakdown of what are the 10 Commandments is hotly debated. Not within Judaism, don't get me wrong, but among many other faiths that share our text, there's disagreement over what is Commandment 1, Commandment 2, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the chart here in all the brilliant color, and I thank Wikipedia for putting this together for me and saving me a lot of work, you can see that there are, on this page alone, 7 different interpretations of how the 10 Commandments should be divided into 10. We have the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, which seems to give the commandments in the way that is outlined in that first column. We have Philo, who was an early Jewish philosopher who has his own interpretation and seems to have also flipped the don't murder and don't commit adultery commandments in his version, in his summary. We have the Talmud's account, which starts with, I am the Lord your God, as the first commandment, rather than the most of the other ones which have that as being a preamble. And then we also have the St. Augustine's version, we have the formal Catholic Church's version, we have the Lutheran version, and we have a Reformed Christian version. Okay, and if you look carefully, they're all different. And none of these are agreeing on what even the 10 are. So the 10 Commandments, self-adjudication, maybe not as easy as we thought if we can't even agree on what the 10 Commandments are. So first of all, let's make sure we understand what Judaism understands as being the 10 Commandments.
I just want to say
Yeah.
thank you very much, because I was at an interfaith meeting, and one of the minister's wives came over. For some reason, she started talking about the 10 Commandments, and she looked at me like I was nuts. But I said, well, the first one is I am the Lord your God. She said, it is not. Now I see what she meant.
And now you understand why.
Oh, she says, but that isn't logical. That doesn't make sense.
How can that be logical? Of course, on all the ark doors in my synagogue, it says Anochi, right? It starts off with, I am the Lord your God.
And evidently she had never seen this chart. She thought that was something wrong with either me or the Jews for not understanding how to read it correctly.
Well, indeed, and there are many people, let's take that as our first example, right? We're in column T, which stands for Talmud. In that first commandment, I am the Lord your God, many people have argued, how can that be a commandment? Right? That's a statement of God, by God. How commanding is that? And Judaism says it's the commandment that you accept, that God is God and God is our God. It's a commandment of belief, and that all the others, according to Judaism, hang off that commandment, because it doesn't matter that you agree that you shouldn't kill or murder, as we're going to get to discuss. What matters, or it doesn't matter if you just agree to that, If you don't also agree to God as being God, then it's just a nice idea or a nice rule for your community. It lacks the sense of being a heavenly ordained principle. Okay, so that's number one in Judaism, is God is God. Number two, and this is also a place where there's a lot of discussion, meaning disagreement, is that in Judaism, having no other gods and not making idols is considered to be a combined number two commandment. Whereas you can see in many other faiths, those are split into being two separate commandments. Having no other gods being one commandment, and having no idols or not making idols being a second commandment. We see how that works there? Yeah. All right. Again, thank you, Wikipedia, for a nice chart. Yeah. When we move down to our third commandment, which is the fourth line on the English side, it says not to take God in vain. Everybody more or less agrees that that is a commandment and being a whole commandment to itself. We just disagree on the numbering. And then number 4, remembering Shabbat to keep it holy. Number 5, to honor your parents. Number 6, don't kill. Number 7, don't commit adultery. Number 8, don't steal. Number 9, not bearing false witness. And then number 10, things get confusing again. We lump all of 10 of not coveting as being a commandment with many examples. But there are other faiths, Augustine's version, the Catholic version, and the Lutheran version, which separate out that there are different commandments concerning different types of covetousness. And that's what's being referred to there. All right? It's just that easy.
Yeah, you're right.
So if we can't agree on the 10 commandments,
Really?
right? Well, part of the problem is that this is, and that's why we started with our Lewis Carroll, our stuff and nonsense. It's hard to understand what was meant by this text with only this text to guide us. If you just handed the Hebrew text to somebody who had learned Hebrew, but had not learned Judaism, had not learned Christianity, had not learned anything about the religion of the ancient world, and just said, translate this, they would have difficulty. And their translation may be considerably different than the translations that we use. And if we ask them, well, could you divide this into 10 portions? Their divisions might be substantially different. It is not self-explanatory. All right, need more proof? All right, so let's look at some commandments then. We're on the bullet points now.
Okay, what is lo tirtzach?
Right, what is lo tirtzach?
Do not murder or do not kill.
Okay, because you will see both translations. Is there a difference between kill and murder in English?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What's the difference?
Intent.
Murder is taking,
Intent?
murder is taking someone's life for the wrong reason, where killing can be defending your home or your country.
So killing means to take a life, whether for a right reason or a wrong reason. And murder means to take a life only for a wrong reason.
Right.
Right? So murder is a subcategory of killing in English.
Absolutely.
So if you say don't kill, you would be saying in English, under no circumstances can you take a life. Whereas if you say don't murder, you would be saying don't take a life unless it is justified according to our rules of right behavior and justice. Those are rather big differences in terms of your action. The Hebrew itself is not 100% crystal clear, transparent, lining up with those two categories in English. That is to say, you can't say, well, lo tirtzach always means don't murder. Or the word tirtzach, it sometimes does seem to refer to killing. So how you put this into English or how you put this into practice, which is more important than just translating, is not self-evident. Right? Does this mean we can't have capital punishment? But the Torah talks about capital punishment. What about self-defense? Do I have to be a pacifist? Well, what's going on here? Let's move on to stealing, if that is what it is.
Okay, what is lo tignov? Does it mean to steal property or people?
Right, so lo tignov by itself means don't steal. But our sages noted a problem with that, which is if you look at the list of commandments that it is surrounded by, right? Don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't bear false witness. All three of those are capital offense. False witness is potentially a capital offense, I should point out. The scale of punishment depends upon what type of false witness you were bearing. But it can be a capital punishment. And certainly murder can have a capital punishment, and certainly adultery can have a capital punishment. Don't steal. Has Judaism ever authorized the execution of a thief?
No,
Not
no.
ever.
Adultery,
Never,
Never.
never, never.
Never.
What's that?
But adultery, we did.
Adultery we did.
Yeah.
If you were to violate the vows of marriage and be intimate with someone outside of that bound while married, slightly different than premarital if neither people are married, but if the person is married and then you do something, that is potentially a capital case, and the person can be executed. Persons can be executed. Theft? Never. You can stop a thief in the night with deadly force, but once they've been captured with having stolen something and they're no longer a potential threat, the penalty can never be execution. So in the words of Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other, right? The theft, stealing seems out of place here. And indeed, traditional commentary in Judaism says this is not theft, this is kidnapping. Do not steal a person, is what's being referred to by this statement of lo tignov. Because otherwise it doesn't fit the context. And we have other commandments about not stealing in great detail in other parts that also go into details of the punishments in other parts of the Torah. So it seems like it would be a better fit for the prohibition on not kidnapping people, which there is also a prohibition of. See how that works? See how different people might disagree with that? Think about how hard that would be if you were back here in the day, right? And you're saying, well, wait, he just said lo tignov. Does that mean I'm not allowed to take my guy as sheep anymore? Or does that mean I can't take him? Or what are we talking about here? Not exactly self-explanatory. Onward.
When is Shabbat? Saturday or Sunday?
Right, we have this whole thing about keep Shabbat holy. When is Shabbat? 6 days you will work, it says in the Ten Commandments, and on the seventh day you will rest. Great. So I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 I'm working, and 7 I'm not. What day of the week do I start counting on? Right? It didn't give us an actual start date. It just gives us a list of days of the solar week. So which one do I start counting on? Because which one I start counting on is going to make a big difference on which one I'm resting on. And indeed, this did become a contentious issue between the Jews and Christians. And the Christians eventually settled, of course, on having Sunday as being their day of rest. And there's nothing intrinsic to the text itself which could prove them wrong. Obviously, I don't believe that was the right decision, but that's because of where I stand. There's nothing that if you just read the Ten Commandments that says Saturday. You see how that works?
Is there not a reason to, well, from when manna was provided, didn't they keep records from then on?
We would hope. So there's lots of circumstantial evidence that points towards what we now call Saturday as being the seventh day, or Shabbat, in the terminology of the Ten Commandments. Not just the record keeping, but how it was observed all the way up into the time even when early Christianity began, and the fact that early Christians also observed Saturday as being a Shabbat, and according to their own records of the early church, changed to Sunday for two reasons. One, because they were trying to un-Judaize Christianity, if that is a word, and if it isn't, it is now. And also because Sunday was considered to be the day of the resurrection, and therefore had, as a day, a more prominent feeling to the Christian community. So yes, there's lots of good reasons why we can believe that Saturday was the seventh day as the Ten Commandments said. But to someone who believes devoutly in the Christian path, this text can't prove it
Rabbi,
by itself.
I just want to say, this conversation can only be had in English, where we call it Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, because in Hebrew, it's first day, second day, third day. What we call the first day, we call it Sunday, but it doesn't have those names. You're right, they kept track, but only by counting 1, 2, 3, 4, not by the same names of the days of the week that we have. So if I wanted to say Tuesday, Yom Rishon, first day,
Why not?
why not? God wasn't bound by these individual days.
Right.
So,
In
So-
my family, we have this argument constantly.
oh,
And those arguments are, I'm guessing, never settled by just pointing to the verse,
right.
right? You can point to this verse all you like. You can even point to the Hebrew all you like.
Mhm.
And it's not going to make one side or the other say, oh, you were right. Because the way they read the same word is very, very different. The same way that most of us, when we hear the word stuff generally, do not read it the same way that Lewis Carroll meant. Because that's just not the way we use that word. That doesn't make Lewis Carroll wrong. It doesn't make us wrong. It just means the word is not in and of itself self-explanatory.
Yet the Seventh-day Adventists are a Christian.
They are a Christian group and very common here in Orlando.
Yes, they adhere to the Saturday as their Sabbath.
Yes, they do. Right. So the Seventh-day Adventists, in their own reckoning, believe that the seventh day, as we also call it, that is to say Shabbat, is the real Sabbath day. And so they have their services and their day of rest as being that day as well, what is now called Saturday. So we do share that. But that was their decision.
Right.
So it's very hard. I'm trying to make sure I get this point across multiple times, multiple ways, and we'll see if it sticks. It's very hard to just say, but look at the verse. Because many different people look at this verse, read the Hebrew even, not just the translation, and will come to very different conclusions.
When did the Shabbat start?
And this was also a point of contention, right?
Was Abraham or Moses or that's what I mean.
Well, okay, that kind of, I thought you meant the more technical of when does Shabbat as a day begin, whereas we say it begins Friday night.
Right.
When did the practice of keeping Shabbat begin? So this is the first time that we are told as a people to have Shabbat, but of course Shabbat as a concept began with creation, right? Because that's why we have, in Vayachulu that says that, and God finished all of creation, and on the seventh day God rested and blessed and sanctified the seventh day. So that there was something special about the seventh day is from the beginning of the universe. That the seventh day was kept like this is from Mount Sinai. What happened in between is lovely room for Midrash. But we don't have a description in the text itself of what did or didn't happen in those in-between years.
Except with the man.
What's that? But the man is part of this.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the man happened just before this? Yes, exactly. Yes. And that's going to get us to our next question in the bullet points.
What is melacha?
Right? It
that is
says, don't do melacha.
What's this melacha that's prohibited on Shabbat?
All right. So God gave us a command. Do not perform melacha on Shabbat. All the other days you can do your melacha, but on this day, don't do any melacha. No?
No.
What does that mean? Generally the word is translated as work. Okay. Are we talking about a certain threshold of calorie expenditure? Right? So if I have burnt 50 calories, it counts as work, but if I've only burnt 49 calories, it's not work. Is it a matter of wattage, of horsepower? These are all ways that we measure force or work within the scientific world. Or is it something else? Does this mean work is only work if it has a lasting effect? Is work only work if it's depressing? Is work only work if you earn a salary from it? Does someone who is a banker allowed to work in his garden on Shabbat because he enjoys it, but a gardener can't work on Shabbat because that's his regular week job? Does Melacha tell us? And yet God has told us we need to do this. Would you-
You know, if you could get a way around this, I'd be very happy, because all during the week I cook in the kitchen and I serve my family their meal. And on Shabbat, okay, I've warmed up the fire, but I'm still running back and forth serving them their meal. Is that going to be considered work that I can't do?
That's a very
Answer
interesting
that one.
family dynamic.
Be careful what you
Yes.
say.
I think if everything's already been pre-cooked, I'm not sure why no one else is able to serve a dish. I can understand why they may not want to risk cooking during the week,
Yes, that's
because they know that your cooking is so much
true.
superior. But putting food on a plate or putting a plate on a table,
That I can do.
any old
And
fool
then I
can do
clean
that.
the plates away as well.
That I don't think needs a special talent.
Darn, I was hoping you'd get me out of that.
Well, I am kind of trying to, and I'm not quite sure what's wrong with the family that they can't help with the serving. Like I said, I might understand why they were hesitant to cook, but the serving, yeah, there's no real reason why they shouldn't be doing that if you are. Paula's hand?
It's all a matter of training.
Ah,
That's where we'll do it.
I think this is another perfect example of why we are not only a biblical religion. I had learned that Malacha represents let's see if I get this right, the 39 categories of creative labor that went into building the Mishkan.
you got that perfect, exactly. I'm not going to make you list them. That list is available online very easily.
You can't get that from the word Malacha, but you can get that if you're a Jew who accepts rabbinic.
Who accepts the rabbinic reading that the description of Shabbat that comes later on in the book of Exodus is juxtaposed with the building of the Mishkan. And the rabbis say that that juxtaposition was very deliberate, to say that the Mishkan, as important as it was, did not trump Shabbat, and therefore anything that you would have done for the Mishkan, you don't do on Shabbat. But you have to accept that interpretation. And what I'm trying to get here is one step further than what you said. It's not that we're not biblical Jews. There's no such thing as Jews who only read the Bible.
Aren't they called Karaites or
Yeah.
something?
They are not.
They're not.
No, they self-referentially believe that, and that's sort of their own internal narrative, but it is impossible to be more than a community of one and only read the text to create your understanding of what God wants and what you are doing.
Well, actually, this thing, the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
Mhm.
How are you supposed to remember it? Just think about it?
Oh, I mean,
Remember.
like I said, these are just four
Yeah,
little
we need
examples
more.
of the difficulties of this.
That's
How do you
right, we
honor
need
your
more.
father and mother? What does that mean? What's the limit of honoring? Is there a limit to honoring? What happens to the father and mother if they have conflicting honors? Who goes first? All of these things have more. What does it mean to not covet? I mean, all of these words are not self-explanatory. So if somebody tells you, I just do what the Bible tells me, who told them that's what the Bible means?
Yeah.
So in other words, these groups who claim to be following the biblical precepts and
Right.
rejecting rabbinic Judaism.
Right?
It's not just that they're rejecting rabbinic Judaism, they're replacing it with some other extra biblical.
Exactly. They have their
System.
own interpretive tradition.
Okay.
And again, I'm not trying to say that the Jewish interpretation is the only superior one and everyone else is just bad or evil. Far from it. But everyone else has an interpretive tradition. Right? Everyone else is reading this text from within a community of like-minded or of shared values or of shared heritage believers. And that's the only way that you can do this. Even this lone guy of one who says, I'm just going to read it by myself and I don't care what anyone else says, not even people that are my co-religionists and not people who are from different religions, it's just me and the Bible. Well, who told you what the word tirtzach means? How did you learn your language? How did you learn your grammar? How did you learn what biblical idioms were like? You cannot learn this as a solo person floating as a mote within the universe of God and think that this is going to lead you to God just by your own silent navel contemplation. It doesn't work like that. That is why it is so important that Jethro shows up, Yitro, and gives Moses this whole pattern of this is the way you need to make sure that people know they're doing the right thing. Because they're not going to just be able to have their home version and sit there and leaf through it and all come to exactly the same conclusions and all be perfectly happy and content. You need to have a process of adjudicating this so that the community is being run in a cohesive, coherent, consistent manner. Okay, which is why we're going to hit a very important text from the book of Deuteronomy, which drives this system of judicial process home big time.
If there arises a matter too hard for you in judgment, being matters of controversy inside your gates, then you shall arise and get to the place which the Lord your God shall choose. And you shall come to the priests, the Levites, and to the judge who shall be in those days, and inquire. And they shall declare to you the sentence of judgment, and you shall do according to the sentence, which they of that place which the Lord shall choose shall declare to you. And you shall take care to do according to all that they inform you, according to the sentence of the Torah, which they shall teach you, and according to the judgment which they shall tell you, you shall do. You shall not deviate from the sentence which they shall declare to you, to the right hand nor to the left.
Well, it's a lot of extra words there
Yeah.
to say, do what the judges tell you, because it's such an important statement, right? Not everybody is their own judge. Yes, on matters of simple issues, do I get to eat that pig? You can be the judge to say, no, I don't get to eat that pig, because this I understand very clearly. But this particular chicken, maybe there's something a little strange when I slaughtered it and looked inside. Maybe I do need to go to the rabbi and say, Rabbi, is this chicken kosher? And if he doesn't know, maybe he needs to go to his teacher and ask whether or not it's kosher, and so on and so forth. The chicken may be getting a little old by then, but hopefully you get the point, right? And this process was repeated over and over again, not just in the times when the temple stood, but throughout our generations, where people who had shelot, they had questions, would come to their local rabbis and get answers. And if the rabbis didn't know an answer or they didn't feel they had a good enough grasp of the halakha for such a complicated or unusual case, they would write a letter to a greater sage of their generation to try and get more clarity. And we have records of these throughout the last 2,000 years. And it has been one of the things that kept Judaism together, is this constant questioning and answering of the most difficult cases by the greatest of the generation to keep us still linked. It didn't mean that every question always went to the guy at the top, because that's what Yitro said didn't work, right? You can't send every question to Rambam. You can't send every question to Saadia Gaon. But when it goes up and up and up, it may eventually reach Rambam as being something that just no one else could really handle perfectly or well. And that was good, because then the answer would go back down, and then all along the line, everyone would have that to share. And everyone would have that connectedly. And then the future generations would say, well, this is how we understand this verse, because this is the ruling that was given in its application.
In English, we have just one word, question.
Yeah.
In Yiddish, we have two words. There's a shaila, which you take to the rabbi because it's that
Right.
deep, and a frage, which is just an ordinary question. What's the weather like? Two different words.
What's a kasha when you say
Kasha.
klutz
Kasha's
kasha?
between.
So a kasha is a difficulty or a question.
Yeah,
It can be used for a question. The klutz kasha means like, what a dumb question.
Yeah, that's close.
Exactly.
That I know, that part I did know.
You know how it's used. You know how it's used, exactly.
Yes.
Although that's a good question, it's a stuff and nonsense kind of thing. It's a klutz kasha. What do the words klutz and kasha have to do together? I mean,
You
it's
can't translate it in English. Certain things just
don't translate.
Just don't translate.
exactly right, and you have to know that.
It's geschmack when you say it.
Ba-dum-bum. Beautifully put, Edie. Beautifully put. Okay, what does
Tasty, it's delicious.
Good, delicious, meaty.
the full flavored? It's got,
It's got-
yeah,
Larry,
Yes.
it's hello to the
I think he had full
schmack.
time.
right. You can't.
And you know.
It's the full bodied. It's not been made into the diet light version. It's caffeine free, whatever. Okay, so example of this. Of what does it really mean then when we say you go to the judge of your generation and you listen and you don't go from the left to the right? That even something that you may think all on your own, you think you understand, that sometimes you may get overruled. What does it mean to really follow through with that?
Thereupon Rabbi Gamliel sent for him, saying, I order you to appear before me with your staff and your money on the day which you think should be Yom Kippur.
Okay, so Rabban Gamliel and that's not Rab, it should be Rabbi Yoshua, get into an argument. And they're arguing about when the new month of Tishrei began. Now, they're arguing about one day or another, right? It's either this day or that day. But the problem is the first day of Tishrei is also famously known as Rosh Hashanah. So depending upon when you think Rosh Hashanah was, 10 days later is going to be when Yom Kippur is. So if you disagree with the court about when Rosh Hashanah was, you're obviously going to disagree about when Yom Kippur is. And Rabban Gamliel is saying to Rabbi Yoshua, who disagreed with him about Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, by your count, I want you here in my office, so to speak, with your staff and your money basically dressed for work, not dressed for Yom Kippur. I want you to show up on the day you think it's Yom Kippur in order that you will show that you accept my judicial authority, that my ruling as being the ruling. Does that make sense? Even though you think it'll be Yom Kippur, it won't be Yom Kippur because I ruled otherwise.
The rabbis didn't agree?
Hmm?
Oh, no.
Occasionally they did argue, yes. It happened a few times. But the point is that Rabban Gamliel is forcing Rabbi Yoshua to publicly acknowledge that it's not Yom Kippur because Rabban Gamliel said it's not Yom Kippur. Even though by his own thought and his own calculations, it is. But it can't be because the chief judge said it wasn't. All right, so we're coming back to this appeals question that you had earlier, Malka.
No, it's the kind of thing when my kids were little, they'd say, why? I said, because I said so. It's the same kind of thing.
And sometimes that was an answer
That's the only
because
answer.
the authority that you had was
right.
what made it so.
Exactly.
Right.
Just like Rabbi Gamliel said, this is it, therefore that's it.
Right. And what's unfortunate is that many people take the phrase, well, many parents use it this way, because I said so, to mean it doesn't really matter what it is. I'm just saying what I want. That's not what that phrase means in Judaism.
No.
It means without it being said that it is so, it is nothing. It is what it is because the sage said so. Right? When you bring that chicken to the rabbi and you say, Rabbi, is this chicken kosher? Before a verdict has been rendered, that chicken is nothing. It's not kosher and it's not non-kosher. It's just a chicken. Once it has been declared kosher, there's no alternate reality to which you can compare the ruling to the kosherness. It is now kosher. Done. There's no takebacks. There's a very good joke where two umpires are arguing, and one umpire is saying, well, when I'm down there and in the zone, I don't care about the crowd. I just call them like I see them, right? And the other umpire says, you're an idiot then, because until I call it, it's nothing. Right? It's not that it's a strike and then I say it's a strike. It's not a strike until I say it's a strike. It's just a ball flying through the air. It has no status. It has no standing. It has no meaning until it has been declared one or the other. And that's up to the umpire, not up to the ball. And this is very difficult for us to sometimes get around because we like objectivity. We like things to be real, and then we're just describing reality. That's not how reality always works, right? Especially not when we're talking about a reality of meaning. A chair may be a chair because you think you recognize what a chair is, but this is only a chair because you have been indoctrinated to think that things that are shaped like this are for sitting. There's nothing about this intrinsically that makes it chair. Just the lenses that have been put into your mind by how you were raised. And if you didn't have those lenses, if you grew up in a society that didn't have chairs, or that had chairs with no legs, like some of the ones you can get in Japan, this wouldn't be a chair. This, what is that? Kind of like a weird table? Or is it the decoration? Is that art? It's not really that artistic. You wouldn't recognize it as chair. because that's just not what you're used to. It's not what you were taught the word chair describes. And yet we all go around acting like this is a chair because that's what it is. Well, it's a chair because that's how we treat it. If we treated it differently, if we treat it like a table, it'd be a table. It's not up to the chair to decide, it's up to us. Okay, so what happens?
Rabbi Yehoshua then went to Rabbi Dosa ben Hakinas, who said to him, if we call in question the house of Rabban Gamliel, we must call in question the decisions of every Beit Din which has existed since the days of Moses up to the present time. For it says, then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. Why were not the names of the elders mentioned? To show that every group of 3 which has acted as a Beit Din over Israel is on a level with the house of Moses.
All right, that is monumental statement.
You could say that.
Yeah. By the way, Rabban Gamliel, I do have to say, is considered by the other sages at this time to be a jerk with the way he's treating Rabbi Yehoshua, but they agree with the ruling. Not necessarily with his calculations, but they agree that his ruling is the ruling. And that's what is being said here. So the reason the names of those other 70 elders that are mentioned of going up with Moses are not given. Why not say the list of all those 70s? We got plenty of other lists of names throughout the rest of this book we call the Torah. Right? It's not like the Torah is shy about listing names. It does it all the time. In fact, where did we get 70 names just recently? This is motion of going from Israel to Egypt. The 70 who went to Egypt with Jacob, right? So we've had a list of 70 names before. It's not like the Torah should be shy listing 70 names. Why not list their names? Because who they were wasn't important. It's what they were. It's the role they filled. It didn't matter that it was Harvey Shapiro or not Harvey Shapiro. Harvey Shapiro isn't important. What's important is that for that moment, he was acting as one of the elders of Israel, that he was acting as one of the Beit Din. And even if Harvey Shapiro is not Moses, when he acts as a Beit Din, he might as well be. Even if you're, I've scribbled on this so many times, even if your judge of the 10 isn't Moses, and he's not, when he gives you a decision or renders a decision between your argument over the sheep, he might as well be Moses. Because his decision now is what is. That's why we're not big on this whole idea of appeals. We do have some rules and some descriptions of what happens when there are gross errors, where it's just like, whoa, that's just completely different than what it should be. But when it's a question of judgment, not of error, but just judgment, it is what the judge says it is. And you don't get to appeal that.
So if the Beit Din in one community decides a question in one way, and across the country, there's another Beit Din that's deciding the exact same question,
right?
But comes down opposite.
Yes.
Then it goes to the next higher?
No. In the community that decided it one way, that's what it is. And in the community that decided another way, that's what it is. And the most famous example we have of that is called Ashkenazim and Sephardim, right? And we have had a history of one group says no legumes, the kitniot for Pesach, and the other group says, why not? And if you're part of the group that says no kitniot, then you don't have kitniot. And if you're part of the group that says, yes, it's okay, then yes, it's okay. And both of them are fine. And when the Ashkenazi guy looks over and he sees his Sephardi neighbor eating down the beans, he doesn't say, sinner. He just says, that looks tasty.
But when I was in Israel, I learned if you are Ashkenazi and your mother-in-law is serving rice at Pesach, do not say sinner to her.
That's generally a good rule of thumb.
It's a shalom bayit.
Yes. Well,
along with it.
Well, the general rule, and we're going to have to move on here real quick, but the general rule is that, in particular with regards to kitniot, is even if you do not eat kitniot or rice, if your neighbor or your family member, extended family is Sephardic and they do, you can eat in their home. You don't necessarily need to eat the beans, but you can eat from their pots and pans without a problem. Because that is a ruling within theirs. They are doing it fine. Even if you yourself are not going to, you have to respect the fact that they are also following the proper procedure, that they are over here on this judge down here. And what he told them for this group of 10, you know, that was our 10 down here. That may have been different than this one, but both of them are fine. And both of them are right, even though they seem like they disagree. Yeah, I know. It's hard for us to sometimes get our head around because we want 100% unanimity, but this is not about 100% unanimity. This is about describing and creating a system of meaning and understanding that is getting us back to the ultimate one, the ultimate unity, which is God. And there are going to be different understandings at different moments and different applications, but it's the process that walks us towards God, not necessarily the individual answer on an individual day in an individual Beit Din. And if we think we can do better just by ourselves, we're in trouble. But I never want to finish on just, a solid note like that. That doesn't mean that the one, the by the self, is off the hook. And that doesn't mean that we just say, oh, well, whatever the Beit Din says, that's it. Which is why we have a very interesting teaching from the Zohar.
Rabbi Yehoshua.
Which is more familiar than you might think. Because I normally, when I say Zohar, people go, Kabbalah. This is something that you might recognize. Would recognize even better if I brought in the Aramaic.
Rabbi Yehoshua thereupon took his staff and his money.
Oh, sorry, we're not as far as I thought. Keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
And went to Yavna to Rabbi Gamliel on the day on which he thought was Yom Kippur.
That is to say, on the day which Rabbi Yoshua thought was Yom Kippur.
So Rabbi Gamliel rose and kissed him on his head and said to him, "Come in peace, my teacher and my student, my teacher in wisdom and my student, because you have accepted my decision."
All right, so there is a reconciliation here at the end. Rabbi Gamliel doesn't go neener, neener, neener. He embraces Rabbi Yoshua and essentially is saying, thank you for keeping us whole, for being my teacher in the sense that what you teach increases my wisdom, but also for being my student in the sense that you recognize that there needs to be a decision for the community about what day is Yom Kippur. Just we kind of have to be on the same page for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now we're going to get to the part from the Zohar.
When the Aron HaKodesh is opened,
That's the ark in the sanctuary.
the gates of compassion in heaven are also opened. Therefore say,
Right, it's considered, according to the Zohar, to be an auspicious time to recite the following prayer.
"Blessed is your name, Master of the universe. Blessed is your crown and
Well,
your
let's
place."
make sure. Does anyone recognize this? Berith Shemei Demare Alma. You may not know the beginning words, but you'll know the concluding. Keep going.
"Let your favor be with your people Israel forever, and let the deliverance of your right hand be seen by your people in your temple. Grant us your good light and receive our prayers with compassion. May it be your will that you lengthen our lives with goodness, and may I be counted among the righteous, so that you have compassion upon me and guard all that is mine and your people Israel's. You are the one who feeds all and sustains all. You are the one who rules over all. You rule over kings, and the kingdom is yours. I am a servant of the Holy Blessed One, and before him and his glorious Torah at all times. I do not trust in any man. I do not rely on any angel. Rather, I trust and rely on the God of heaven, who is a God of truth, whose Torah is truth, whose prophets are truth, and who is mighty to work goodness and truth. In him I trust, and to his holy and precious name I utter praises. May it be your will that you open my heart to Torah and fulfill the wishes of my heart and those of all your Israel for good and for life and for peace. Amen.
Amen. Okay. Why am I finishing off with this piece? Well, because I'm confused. It seems odd here in the middle, right? I do not trust in any man. I do not rely on any angel. It seems to be implying that here I am standing in front of the Torah, and I am all that matters, right? You God, you and me, I am your servant. We got this together. I don't need anyone else. That's not what it's saying. It's saying I do not rely on any man or any angel. It means that I do not rely on them exclusively. They are not the transmitter of ultimate truth. They in themselves are not important. Torah is important, right? It's not that I rely on Harvey Shapiro because Harvey Shapiro is more spiritually gifted than me, because Harvey Shapiro is better than me, because Harvey Shapiro is a wonder worker. I don't rely on Harvey Shapiro. I rely on Rabbi Harvey Shapiro, because Rabbi carries with it this whole system, which is there to make sure that we as a community can understand together. We say this blessing not just as an individual every time we open up the Torah. We say this as a blessing when we open up the Aron HaKodesh, which is found in our community. When we stand together to receive Torah as a group, when we stand together to hear the Torah being read as a group, when we try to learn it as a shared exercise, much like we're doing today, but even more poignantly on Shabbos, that's what we're talking about here. And we're saying, I am as important as Harvey Shapiro, but I also recognize that there is a path to understanding the truth of Torah, which comes together as a group. The individual and the group need to both coexist, and they need to both cooperate. That's why Rabbi Yoshua needed to challenge Rabban Gamliel, and he also needed to accept Rabban Gamliel. He had to teach Rabban Gamliel, and he also had to put aside his disagreements in order that the community could also be whole. It's not easy. It's not always pleasant. Sometimes we feel the judge got it wrong and my sheep went to the wrong guy. But we also understand that we have to be together overall, and that one person on their own can't even figure out 10 commandments. They need to be together before we can make sense and to make meaning and to then make purpose of what God has given us with Torah. We've got to keep our heart open for that, which is why this blessing from the Zohar is so beautiful. Okay, we're going to finish there today. I'm sure there may be a few more questions, but let me hit the stop button so that those that need to leave can head out. Well, only a little late. It's never late when you're studying Torah, though, right?